Well, first of all, I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Um, yeah, I just got called the most extroverted man in coding, and there's actually, I think, a reason for that. I was just telling Rüdiger a little while ago that when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I decided I would become a magician. And I actually bought a bunch of, I acquired some cards and bought a few tricks, and I was doing stuff, and I put on shows for my family that I forced them to watch. So that all figures into that. But I think it's interesting that for most of my life, I've continued to pursue somehow being a magician in the sense that I took a technology, when you have one of the tricks I had was a thing where you could, I had a gerbil hidden in a little container. It looked empty, and you put fire in it and went boom, and then there was a gerbil. My pet gerbil was inside. So I'm using a technology to somehow make a kind of magic happen. But that identifies, for me, quickly, one of the heart of what I want to go to. And I think I would just ask you to take a second, because you've probably all seen a magic act, and think about where's the one that was so meaningful to you personally that it kind of changed your life. And probably, I'm guessing, the answer is probably none of them. And the reason is that magic tricks are about spectacle, and they're about something that is immediately surprising and amazing, and it tastes really good while you're eating it, kind of like candy, but the feeling is quickly gone. And I think as artists, we try and do something a little bit more than that, right? We try and go to something a little bit deeper. And so what I want to sort of talk about tonight is I made a piece a few years ago, that was really a big shift for me. And I want to talk about the stuff I was doing before, because there was a lot of people doing work like that. And then I want to talk about that piece. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I don't even want to show any examples of the former. I want to spend more time on the latter so that we have time to have a conversation at the end. But to introduce the concept, if you take a look at the field, and the field I know best is dance and interactive performance and interactive media. That's what I've worked on most of my life, and that's what I would say I know the very best. And if you look in general at that field, what we mostly saw were people who found ways to take sensory devices that could measure the movement of a performer's body, usually, turn that into numbers that a computer could understand, take those numbers, do something to them, perhaps change them a little bit, and then use them to generate music, to cause a visual image to be modified or to appear, to cause theatrical lighting to change, or any other kinds of digitally controllable media. So in other words, we made a link between the human body and all of these other things that we can control with a computer. And I've given that a name. I'm calling it the digital reflection, because it is, in essence, when you do that movement and the video changes and the lights go on or whatever is happening, those things become a representation of the body. It's like a mapping from movement to media, and it somehow is the body. And in the past, I've said, in talking about this, that the performer's body is extended to the edges of the stage because it encompasses the whole stage now, not just the location that they hold at that moment. So there's quite a bit of, I did many pieces like this, many of my colleagues did pieces like this. You can look in the late 90s and the early aughties and see lots and lots of work that was done in this form. And I think that my criticism of it, while there were many beautiful pieces made and pieces that I admire, my criticism is that it was a little bit like that magic trick in the sense that it focused more on making perhaps a really exquisite and often very beautiful scenography that would accompany the dance, but somehow it wasn't expanding the language of dance. And now, by the way, my actual training artistically is a composer. I am not a choreographer, and this group, Troika Ranch, that I co-founded, was the other part of it is a woman called Dawn Stappiello, who's a choreographer that I've worked with since we founded that group about 20 years ago. And some of the ideas that I'm talking about, and especially in terms of the digital reflection, are things that we really developed together. So I want to give credit to Dawn Stappiello, because our ongoing partnership is a lot of where these thoughts have come from. But the main thing is that I think when we began as young artists, we thought that we were going to change the way dances were made. I thought we were going to change the field of dance, that by adding this stuff onto the body, the act of choreographing and the resulting choreography was fundamentally going to change. And it just didn't. If you look at this field of work, you can see that what we mostly see, now in our case, we were kind of doing this from the very beginning, but in some cases, the technology was added on to the pieces, like the choreographer was already established, and then the technology part of it came into the picture later. And if it's interesting to compare the choreography before and the choreography after, because in fact, they're often very similar. In other words, the choreography didn't fundamentally change. They just added this new element that gave a fullness and a richness, and often, like I said, it often was very beautiful. But I think we wanted to try and push this along. We were hoping that the way we were making dances, that the language of dance would somehow change. And what I want to focus on is something that happened when we did this more recent piece, because it really did for us do just that. It really changed the way we were working. So I want to just introduce you to that. And the name of the piece is called Loop Diver. The basic notion of the piece was that we started with the idea we wanted to use the notion of loops as a way of generating choreography and music as well. So we just started doing the obvious thing. We would make videos of movement, of dance phrases, and putting loops on them. It quickly became apparent that we wanted to do something more than just the typical loop where you see the same material each time. And so in my tool, Isadora, I added a new module, a new feature that allowed you to do some different things with the loops. Instead of just having a loop where the same material was repeating each time, you could instruct the computer that each time it got to the end of the segment, it could modify the starting and ending points of the loop. And so in so doing that, you could change the way in which the material was revealed. So the first thing I want to show you is a short clip that demonstrates how that worked a little bit. So let's see. Sorry. Started in the middle. Let's try again. Okay, so here's the material without any, that's the raw material. They stand up, they step away. Here's the loop we know where it's the same material each time. This is also the same material each time, but now it's going forward and backwards. I think we've all seen this kind of looping before as well. Now here, the starting point and the ending point get later each time. And what you see is that a little more of the movement is revealed after each repetition. Now in this one, the starting point is fixed and the ending point is becoming later. And it almost feels like a decrescendo. As a composer, I think of this as a decrescendo, in fact. In this one, the starting point is moving this way and the ending point is moving this way, so you're seeing less material all the time and the rhythm increases. Okay, so those are some of the examples. There's some other variations. Maybe there's, I think, 8 different variations of how we did that. And so we could construct those loops and make those things move in any way we wanted, and that became the tool that we started to compose with. And now I'm going to compress a long research period into a very short time, because I'm just going to skip over, because there was a lot of failed experiments along the way, things that we tried. I mean, I'll just mention one thing is that the immediate instinct was to start making choreography, or moves that we would consider normally to be dance moves. This actually was very unsuccessful. It didn't look very interesting when you looped it. But when we started trying more pedestrian material, things like people walking up to each other and shaking hands, or embracing, or just even glancing or turning the head to glance at someone, those were far more compelling to see. So we headed in this direction of this very pedestrian movement. And then using what we had discovered was possible with this tool, this is what we ended up doing. We created a 5-minute long piece. It was a complete piece with a beginning, middle, and end. It had choreography and music. We took that into the studio, taught the dancers how to dance that 5 minutes, and we recorded it from many angles, video recording and audio recording as well. Then Dawn and I took that material back to our studio, and we sat down with this tool and started to compose with it. And that was when the first thing shifted, because normally she would be in the studio working, I'd write some music, we'd bring it together. That's quite normal, I think, in terms of the way dances are made. But in this case, because every decision that she made to favor her choreography or to do something where she saw something visually interesting or for her, changed my music, because they were completely linked. The video and the audio were together. And the same thing for me. If I started to change the loops to compose something that was, for me, compositionally interesting, I was changing her choreography. So what that meant was there was no way to work apart. We absolutely had to be together every second to compose this. And that was really challenging, because also there was a lot of negotiation, because there was sometimes I wanted something that I wanted to hear, but it really did not satisfy what she wanted to see in her choreography. So this was quite a process that we went through to try and compose this, and we were working in a very different way. I mean, we'd always worked very closely together, but now it was really extremely intimate. We really had to be there for everything together. And so the final part of this, I think that I'm sorry, I skipped something. The final part of this is that we did that. We did these things and we composed it. And I want to make it clear, it's not an algorithm. Some people, when they see this, assume that there's an algorithmic process. That's not true. We sat and made decisions step by step to construct this and get it laid out into something that we felt was compelling. And so through the repetition, that 5-minute piece of video and music expanded to 45 minutes. And the video has about just under 3,000 edits in it. Yeah? And so the next step, I think if we would have just showed you that video, it would be actually something that felt quite familiar. I think this kind of thing, we've seen it in one way or another. But I think the crazy step, or the thing that we did that was a little bit different, was we then took that video, gave it to our dancers, put it on each of their computers, and said, learn this and do it exactly as you see it. And that's when the whole process really opened up. Because the first interesting result was that the whole group got kind of depressed. It was interesting. We typically, as Troika Ranch, we have quite a lively process in the studio. It's very open. We're very open to what our performers have to say. We're working, together. It's quite enjoyable. But in this case, the whole energy of the group sunk, and Dawn and I didn't understand what was going on. And really, we did a couple processes to figure it out. And after some improvisational speaking exercises that we did with the dancers, what we came to discover was that this was almost an attack on their body. This thing of doing this kind of movement, which I can only partially do, they do it much better than I, was really hard on them, because it was so anti the way we move as human beings. It was something else. Then there was the whole challenge of memorizing this. We gave them at the first words out of their mouth when we told them what they were going to do was, this is impossible. But that's actually the key to the whole thing, I think. I like to tell a story related to that. The choreographer Jerome Bell, who's been very influential on many choreographers across Europe and America too, he's really changed the conversation about what a dance is, has a piece featuring a dancer who danced for Mark Coniglio for many years called Cédric Andrieux. I think I'm pronouncing that sort of right. It's called Story of a Dancer, and he basically stands in front of us all night and just tells us for 2 hours about his life as a dancer, and this is what Jerome Bell is proposing as a dance piece. But the part that I want to zero in on, you may know if you're involved in dance that at the end of his career, Mark Coniglio was using an animation tool to create his choreography. He was throwing the I Ching, and that would determine the postures of the body, and he would lay these out and come into the studio. So in fact, that also points out that I don't think we did anything new here. I think we did it was new for us, but I don't want to claim that this idea of an intervention, which is what I'm calling this, was a new thing. There are plenty of other interventionists out there. We can also, from the music world, I would cite, for instance, Milton Babbitt, extreme serialism. This is also an intervention. But he tells a story during the course of this piece. He was brand new to the company, and Merce Cunningham came into the studio, or they had the computer set up, and it was his first week there, and he was presented with the screen and said, learn this. This is your choreography. And the body, it did one typical sort of Merce kind of lungy thing, and then it went boom, and it levitated for 3 seconds in the air. And he was expected to do that. And he described his feeling at that moment as being humiliated. And he talked a little bit, and this is a guy who was the best dancer in his class at I think it was the Paris Conservatoire where he graduated. I mean, this is a really fine performer who is an amazing dancer, who can do almost anything. But Merce presented him with something that was absolutely not doable just because of the laws of physics. And his reaction, as someone who had been trained to fulfill the needs or the desires of the choreographer at all times, was that he was humiliated because he couldn't do it. But in the end, he set out to fulfill Merce's request and to levitate for 3 seconds, which of course he couldn't do. But it led him to, as he described it, move in a way that was new for him, because he had to come up with a solution to an impossible problem. Excuse me. And that's what I think happened in our piece too. We presented the dancers with something that they thought was impossible. And there's also the impossibility, if you look at an edit on a videotape, I can have my hand go from here to here in 0 time. But if you actually try that, you realize you can't actually do that. That's impossible. You can't go from here to here in 0 time because it's not, the laws of physics don't allow it. But yet we were saying to them, you need to do that. And that's another reason that the energy of the group went so in this kind of down place, was because no matter how well they did it, they were always failing. They were always in a state of failure. And so, nevertheless, we set out, and as I just described in the Jerome, or in the Cedric Andriot story, they set out to try and solve the problem. And in trying to solve the problem, that's when the invention of this piece really occurred. I mean, we gave them this score that they had to fulfill, but they had to make decisions not only about how do they accomplish that edit, which is impossible, but also just negotiating, how do I stay together? Because the digital materials, that means the sound and the video, are always present. And that is always the measurement of whether they're on or off everything they're supposed to be doing. And that's always there. But if I'm dancing with someone, is it more important that I'm with them, or is it more important that I'm with this? Well, we'd all like to be together, but there's always a negotiation. And this was also very strong in their minds. To make this clear, though, I want to step back for just a second and let you actually see what the process looked like, what we really gave them. So here's a clip. So this is the base material. This is the 5 minutes, or at least the first 22 seconds of the 5 minutes. And then this is what we handed to the dancers. So down here at the bottom, let me zoom in on that. So this is telling them what loop they are in. That's the step within that loop. This indicates that it's a shifting loop where the 2 points are moving like this over time. And the duration, D, without anything next to it, means the duration is fixed. By the way, the clicks that you hear were not there in the final performance. This is their score, and this was to help them learn where those loop points were very precisely, because without that, we just found they couldn't learn it. they needed that guide to be able to get it into their memories and into their bodies. So here we are a minute in, but in fact, if you look at the, I can't see it from here, but we're still only about 15 seconds along in the original video, something like that, not even 12 maybe. And I just want to let it get to the next loop so you can see this. So we've just switched to loop 2. This one, it's not shifting, but the duration is getting less. Okay, so you get the idea. That's what they were given to learn, yeah? And so now, after we went through that process, this is how it actually came out on the stage, at least that section, the very beginning of the piece. Just in the interest of time, because I want to get to the part where we can have a discussion, I'll just let that go in the background. But I think all I can say about this is that for us, every aspect of making the piece was totally changed. We were in completely different territory. We didn't know how to behave anymore, and we had to rework the entire way that we made a dance. The dancers had to relearn, had to come up with a new way to memorize. They had to come up with new ways to rehearse together. And the main point is, none of this really matters. The backstory doesn't really matter. It's what ended up on the stage. And that's the part that, for us, was so interesting, because it's a hard piece to watch as well. For the same reason, I think, that it's difficult for the dancers to feel this on their body. It's difficult to watch, because I think that I often tell a story when I talk about this piece about taking a day off in New York City when we were working there on the piece, going to Central Park, walking into the park and seeing a man on a park bench, a homeless guy, tattered clothes, very dirty, and he was doing this. Like that. And I watched him for 10 minutes or more before I finally walked away, and he was still doing it. What I took that to mean is that person has experienced a trauma so difficult that the only way to comfort himself is by repetitively moving his body. And I think, from what people who saw the piece have told us, that was what they saw also. They saw that there was a trauma somewhere behind all of this, and these people were locked into it. And they even begin to feel it themselves, because for me it was fascinating. As I operate the show using Isadora, I see some of the members of the audience start to move like this along with the performers. And that was I just was very surprised by that they were so caught into it that they started doing it too. But that's what they felt. They felt like these people were really trapped. So there was a certain level of satisfaction when, at the end of the piece, because this is how it ends, since you're not going to see the end, one of those dancers leaves the loop. 5 of them remain, but 1 escapes. And that provided them, it was both satisfying on one hand because somebody got out, but on the other hand, the rest of them were still stuck. So it was not an easy ending in that regard either. So the thing that I want to get to by exposing you to all of this is the thing I would like to talk about, and that is there more potential in the notion of a digital intervention where we take a process that comes from the technological world, impose it upon ourselves, and deal with it, generate impossible situations and instructions for the human organic body to execute that come from a technological world? Will that lead us in a stronger direction of creativity? And I don't mean just in dance. It could be in theater. I think maybe it's mostly related to performing arts, but again, dance is what we did. Is that a more powerful direction to go than this notion of the digital reflection? Because people have been doing it for a long time, and I don't personally feel like it got us a long way. And I criticize my own work when I say it, because I did a lot of that work. And before I launch us off into a discussion about it, I want to tell you some observations that I have about it. 1 second. What occurred to me as I thought about this is that as a composer, when I think about instruments, because I have created a lot of interactive instruments, I often think of the violin. And one of the things about it is that the reason it's a great instrument is it's incredibly sensitive. You do the tiniest little gesture on it and you hear a result that is very, you can really hear the result. So this is an incredibly sensitive instrument. Now think about, for those of you who work in this kind of field, think about the kinds of sensors you've worked with. If you compare it to a violin, I guarantee you it falls way, way short. I mean, in the beginning, if we had sort of 8 bits of, when I first made this device that measured the flexion of the dancer's joints, we had 8 bits of resolution. That felt great. But the problem is, it's so low res that it doesn't really give you very much. And then the next step is, okay, now I have to compensate for that problem, because in fact, all that incredibly beautiful inflection that this dancer has spent their whole life learning to give you with their body is lost. It's actually not there anymore. So the next step is we start making a rather sometimes spectacular video so that that little gesture has something very noticeable that we see as a result, and or we start even inventing information. One of the things that happened late in that arc of the digital reflection kind of world was that people started going towards artificial intelligence. And I think we can, I will state that I think artificial intelligence hasn't really panned out. I mean, Marvin Minsky was talking about this stuff at MIT a long time ago, and not much has really happened. But yet, they start using artificial intelligence to try and invent information, which is really a response to the fact that the sensors aren't giving them much in the first place. So in other words, there's a lot of compensation. And what I think is interesting about this digital intervention, when we come from the world of technology, this computer and this screen sitting here, they are low resolution in that way. Even this high HD, high definition screen with 2,000 pixels on it or so, that is way less information than I can give you with my whole body, even probably just my face, in terms of pure data bandwidth. By the way, if anybody can tell me, I'm searching for someone who can tell me how to find out what is the bandwidth of the human body in bits per second. I would like to know that, actually. I'm really curious about it, because I'd like to make a comparison to 8-bit sensors and what the actual bandwidth of the human body is. So the thing is, it's very low resolution, and something like those edits that I'm giving you are even lower resolution still if you think of them as events. They're quite separate and static. But when you take that and you give it to an extremely high resolution device, the dancer, that's where the invention can happen, because you don't need artificial intelligence, because they have real intelligence. And the beautiful thing about that performer is, unlike this technology, they actually understand context. The reason that I think we started doing this digital reflection stuff in the beginning, one of the reasons I did it, was that I was convinced that if you allow the performer to add the timing and inflection that they could give to a performance, which is what they do all the time. The reason we love a great performer is because they're doing little tiny manipulations of the intensity and the timing with which they're doing something. That's what makes the performance great. And I thought, okay, let's give that inflection to the dancers. And I think that's still a good idea, but one of the problems is if the sensors can't actually measure what they're doing, it doesn't matter much. Yeah? But if you flip it around and you take this very low resolution source, this technological source, and feed it to the dancer, and especially if that technological source creates problems that can't really be solved in the real world, the context that those dancers have for the situation and the piece and what they know about the piece and everything else will lead them to do something. And invention happens, and something new happens maybe. So I guess to try and start it into a question that we might consider, it's, I would just like to discuss what you think about this. I mean, I'd like to know if anybody has experiences with pieces that use these kinds of sensors that really left a mark on them, that they really remember. Because I think in the end, maybe that's my own personal preference, but I would like to see artworks that I can't forget. I've seen a few in my life. I've seen a few that I really can't forget. And usually they also weren't easy. They were often beautiful, but there was also part of them that was disturbing. Those two always go together for me in terms of the ones I remember. So think about the pieces, if you have seen those kinds of work, that have left a mark on you. And maybe let's consider, or you can give me your own stories about where you might have encountered these kinds of interventions and if they've worked for you or not worked for you. I think it can be quite an open discussion about where this is going, because for me, the main point is I just want to see us inventing pieces that are truly compelling and that really leave a mark on us, that we walk away and we kind of can't forget them. And I haven't seen a lot of pieces in the digital reflection mode that have done that. But somehow this piece changed me. I don't know if it changed anybody else, but it changed me. And I want to continue down that road and see what else I can do with it. So that's my opening proposal, I guess, or my provocation. And now I think we can just open it up to a discussion, a reaction to anything I've had to say.